So what fascinating source are we diving into today?
Well, today's deep dive is all about Chapter 47, Inner Wisdom, from the Built for God movement,
BFG.
which, by the way, is described as like the Christian edition of the Tao Te Ching.
Wow, that's interesting. Right off the bat, we've got this blend of Eastern philosophy and Christian thought.
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting exploration, and this chapter specifically focuses on restoring the truth through, as it calls it, a new expression of God's love.
Okay, so restoring the truth, what does that even mean?
Well, it seems to be all about this idea that we need to shift our focus from looking outward for answers to looking inward. Like, instead of constantly searching externally for knowledge and understanding, we should be turning inward for wisdom.
So it's like saying that the real journey of discovery isn't about exploring the world out there, but exploring the world within ourselves.
That's a great way to put it. And the chapter suggests that by cultivating our inner spiritual life, by deepening our faith, we can actually gain a deeper understanding of the world around us and even see the way of God.
It's like a shortcut to wisdom, right? Instead of getting lost in all the external noise and information, we find clarity and direction by going within.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're going to unpack this whole concept of inner wisdom for our daily lives. Like, how do we actually put this idea of looking inward into practice?
Great question. And the chapter starts off with a really powerful image right from the beginning. It says, without going out of your door, without looking out of your window.
Whoa, stop right there. I love that. It's like it's telling us to hit the pause button on all the external distractions, like shut out the noise of the world for a second and look within.
Right. And it goes on to say, seek within to know the world. It's suggesting that what we're seeking might actually be found inside ourselves, not out there in the chaos.
I love that. And you know what's really cool is that the chapter brings in some really interesting scriptural support for this idea.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It pulls from various verses that emphasize the importance of inner faith and understanding. Like, for example, 2 Corinthians 4.1618. It talks about how we shouldn't fix our eyes on what is seen, but on what is unseen, the eternal.
Yeah, that verse really highlights the idea that true understanding comes from something beyond our immediate sensory experiences, like beyond what we can just see and touch.
Exactly. And then there's John 20.29, where Jesus says, blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. It's all about the power of faith, even when we don't have physical proof.
Right. And the chapter also mentions Proverbs 17.24, that one about how wisdom is near to the discerning. And then there's 1 Samuel 16.7, where God tells Samuel that he looks at the heart, not outward appearance.
Yeah. It's a really powerful point. God isn't concerned with superficial things. He's looking at our hearts, our inner selves. And the chapter uses these verses to build this idea that the most important knowledge, the most vital understanding, isn't something we acquire out there in the world, but something we cultivate within.
It's like our inner world is this untapped well of wisdom and understanding just waiting to be discovered.
I like that, an untapped well. And, it's interesting because the next part of the chapter throws out this really counterintuitive thought. You ready for this?
Hit me with it.
All right. It says, the more you outwardly seek this world, the less you will know yourself.
Hold on a second. That's deep. We live in a world that's all about like, go out there, do more, experience more, learn more, right? But this is saying that all that outward seeking might actually be hindering our self-understanding.
And potentially even blocking our connection with, the divine, with God. It's like all the external noise and distractions can drown out that inner voice.
Yeah, it's like we're so busy chasing after things in the external world that we lose touch with who we are at our core.
And with our relationship with God. And that brings us to this really intriguing part. The chapter kind of throws out this riddle almost. It says, this is why the wise know the world without going places. See the way of God without looking, and achieve without doing. What do you make of that?
It's definitely a head scratcher, right? Like,
yeah.
How can you know the world without actually going out and experiencing it?
Right. But I think it's pointing towards the idea that through deep interconnection, through cultivating that inner wisdom, we gain a kind of universal understanding. It's like tapping into these fundamental spiritual principles that govern everything.
So it's not about having literal physical experience of everything, but understanding the underlying principles, the patterns, the essence of things.
Precisely. And then there's that phrase, achieve without doing. That one really stands out.
Yeah, achieve without doing. It seems almost paradoxical.
Right. But I think it's getting at this idea of surrender and trust, like aligning yourself with God's will and allowing things to unfold naturally rather than constantly striving and forcing outcomes.
It's not about being passive, but about a different kind of action, an internal action that's rooted in trust and faith.
Exactly. And it ties in nicely with that verse from James 3.17, that one that talks about how the wisdom that comes from God is gentle and peaceable. It's not marked by this kind of aggressive striving. And then, of course, there's that powerful image from Exodus 14, the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still.
Wow. That verse is a perfect example of what we're talking about. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most effective action is actually surrender. It's about trusting in a power greater than ourselves.
Beautifully put. And so this whole idea of looking inward, of cultivating inner wisdom, is really the foundation for what the chapter calls the Trinitarian method, MAP, for renewal.
Okay, so we've got a roadmap here. MAP, what does that stand for?
MAP stands for mindset, aim, and practice. And it's presented as a practical framework for actually putting these principles of inner wisdom into practice. And it's all rooted in, core Christian beliefs. God's love shapes our mindset, trust in the Son guides our aim, and faith in the Holy Spirit empowers our practice.
It's like a holistic approach to developing that inner focus.
Exactly. So let's start with mindset. The chapter breaks it down into 5 key mindsets that are essential for cultivating inner wisdom. And the first one is a mindset of inner reflection and self-knowledge.
Which ties in perfectly with that opening line we talked about, right? Without going out of your door, seek within to know the world. It's all about prioritizing that inner dialogue, that self-examination, over constantly looking for answers or validation from the outside world.
And the chapter even references Psalm 139.23. Search me, O God, and know my heart. And also Psalm 46.10, be still and know that I am God. Both of those verses really underscore the importance of inner stillness and examination.
Yeah, those verses are all about creating that space for quiet reflection, for really connecting with God on a deeper level.
Exactly. So how do we actually put this mindset of inner reflection and self-knowledge into practice?
Well, the chapter suggests taking a moment for reflection before acting, whether we're making decisions at work or dealing with personal stuff. Instead of just reacting to external pressures, we pause and look inward. We consider our motivations, our values, and all of that in light of our faith.
Yeah, that's great practical tips, like taking a breath before we jump into action. Now, the second mindset the chapter outlines is the mindset of faith in God's plan.
Which is connected to that line, without looking out of your window, have faith within to see the way of God. It's all about trusting God's wisdom and guidance, even when we can't see the full picture, right?
Precisely. It's about choosing to believe that God has a plan, even when things seem uncertain or confusing. And the chapter reminds us of 2 Corinthians 5.7, for we live by faith, not by sight, and Proverbs 3.5, trust in the Lord with all your heart. These are such powerful reminders, especially when we're going through tough times.
Absolutely. When we're facing challenges, it can be so easy to get caught up in fear and doubt, but those verses remind us to keep our focus on God and His plan.
The chapter suggests a really practical way to strengthen this mindset, especially in uncertain time. It's about consciously choosing to trust in God's plan, even when we don't fully understand it. Instead of, trying to control every outcome or seeking constant external reassurance, we surrender to God's wisdom.
It's like that saying, let go and let God.
Exactly. Now, the third mindset is the mindset of contentment and gratitude. And while it's not directly tied to one of those opening lines, it definitely aligns with this whole idea of reducing outward seeking.
Right. It's about recognizing the abundance we already have in our lives and cultivating a deep sense of thankfulness for God's blessings.
It's about shifting our focus away from what we lack and towards what we've been given.
Yeah, and when we're content with what we have, we're less likely to be caught up in this constant pursuit of more, more, more.
Exactly. And this chapter points to a couple of key verses here. 1 Timothy 6.6, godliness with contentment is great gain. And 1 Thessalonians 5.18, give thanks in all circumstances.
Those are great reminders to be thankful, even in the midst of challenges.
Absolutely. And you know what? The chapter offers a really practical way to cultivate this mindset.
What's that?
A daily gratitude practice. It could be something as simple as taking a few minutes each day to reflect on what you're thankful for. Maybe jotting down a few things in a journal or simply saying a prayer of thanks.
I love that. So simple, but so powerful. Now let's move on to the fourth mindset. The mindset of humility and service.
This one's connected to see the way of God without looking and achieve without doing. So how does humility fit into this concept of achievement?
It's really about recognizing that true achievement isn't about self-promotion or striving for personal glory. It's about surrendering our ego and focusing on serving others.
It's about recognizing that true greatness comes through humility, not through self-exaltation.
Exactly. And the chapter brings in a couple of verses to support this idea. Matthew 20.26, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And Philippians 2.3, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves.
Powerful words. So how do we actually put this mindset of humility and service into action?
Well, the chapter encourages us to look for opportunities to serve those around us, whether it's our colleagues at work, our family members, or even volunteering in our communities. It's about shifting our focus from our own needs and desires to the needs of others.
So it's about putting others first.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final mindset, the mindset of patience and trust in God's timing.
Which is also linked to and achieve without doing. So why is patience so important in this whole framework?
Well, in our fast-paced, instant gratification culture, patience can be a real challenge. But this mindset emphasizes the importance of waiting on God's direction and trusting that His timing is perfect, even when it doesn't align with our own desires or expectations.
Yeah, it can be tough to wait, but sometimes the best thing we can do is simply be patient and trust that God is working things out.
And the chapter reminds us of a couple of great verses here. Romans 8.25. But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still.
Those are some powerful reminders to just be still and wait on God.
Absolutely. So we've covered the 5 key mindsets for cultivating inner wisdom.
Which brings us to the next part of the MAP framework.
So how do these aims relate to the mindsets we just discussed?
Well, think of the aims as gives us a specific target to focus on, helping us to translate those internal shifts, those mindsets, into concrete goals.
So they're like the practical application of those mindsets.
Exactly. So for example, the mindset of inner reflection and self-knowledge naturally leads to the aim for inner peace and self-knowledge. It's about actively pursuing that inner stillness and understanding we talked about.
And the mindset of faith in God's plan guides us to aim for faith and trust in God's plan, making a conscious decision to rely on God's guidance, even when things are unclear.
Right. And the mindset of contentment and gratitude leads to the aim for contentment and gratitude, making a deliberate effort to appreciate what we have and cultivate a sense of satisfaction.
And then the mindset of humility and service points us towards the aim for humility and service to others, actively seeking ways to support and uplift the people around us.
And finally, the mindset of patience and trust in God's timing leads to the aim for patience and trust in God's timing, choosing to wait on God's perfect plan rather than trying to force our own timeline.
I love how each of these aims takes those abstract concepts of mindset and turns them into something tangible, something we can actually work towards.
That's the beauty of this framework. It gives us a clear path to follow. Now, are you ready for the final piece of the MAP puzzle?
Bring it on. What's next?
Practice. It's all about putting those mindsets and aims into action. The chapter outlines 4 key practices for actually cultivating inner wisdom in our daily lives.
Okay, I'm ready to get practical.
The first one is to seek inner wisdom and divine guidance. And this is where those spiritual disciplines we talk about come into play. It's about engaging in daily reflection, prayer, and scripture reading. It's creating space to connect with that inner source of wisdom.
And the chapter reminds us of a couple of key verses here. Psalm 46.10, be still and know that I am God. And Isaiah 58.11, the Lord will guide you always.
It's all about quieting the noise of the world and tuning into that inner voice, that connection with the divine.
Exactly. And the second practice is to trust in God's guidance over external knowledge.
Even when things don't make sense from a worldly perspective.
It's about surrendering our need to control every outcome and trusting that God has a plan, even when we can't see it.
And, one practical way to strengthen this practice of trust is to take some time to reflect on times in our past when we've seen God's guidance.
Oh, I like that. Looking back and seeing how God has worked in our lives can really boost our faith and make it easier to trust Him in the present.
Exactly. Now, the third practice is practice contentment and detachment from material desires.
This is where we start to challenge those cultural messages that tell us we need more, right?
Exactly. It's about recognizing that true fulfillment comes from within, from our relationship with God, not from accumulating possessions.
So it's about cultivating gratitude, simplifying our lives, and being generous with what we have. And the chapter references Matthew 6, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, and 1 Timothy 6.6. But godliness with contentment is great gain.
It's about letting go of that attachment to material things and focusing on what truly matters.
And that brings us to the final practice, achieve through humility and non-attachment to outcomes.
This is where we really embrace that achieve without doing concept. It's about acting with humility without needing recognition or praise, and releasing our attachment to specific results, trusting that God is in control.
It's about focusing on the process of serving and contributing rather than getting caught up in the outcome.
And the supporting scriptures here are Matthew 20.26 and Philippians 4.13, which talks about finding strength in Christ.
So the whole MAP framework really gives us a practical roadmap for cultivating inner wisdom. It's not just about abstract concepts. It's about taking concrete steps to align our minds, our aims, and our actions with God's will.
Well said. The chapter concludes with this really interesting section on respond.
Respond. Okay, so we've gone through this whole process of inner renewal, of cultivating inner wisdom. So where does that lead us? How do we then respond to the world around us?
That's a great question. And what's so fascinating is that this section actually highlights how these principles of inner wisdom, these Christian principles, resonate with teachings from other religions and spiritual traditions.
Oh, wow. So it's not just a Christian concept, but a universal truth.
Exactly. The chapter focuses on 4 key themes and presents parallel teachings from Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Islam.
It shows that there's this common thread of wisdom that runs through different cultures and belief systems.
Right. So the first theme is seeking inner wisdom. And the chapter draws some really interesting parallels between Matthew 6.6 and Christianity, various forms of Buddhist meditation, the teachings in the Bhagavad Gita in Hinduism, and the Islamic practice of dhikr.
All of these practices emphasize the importance of turning inward, of quieting the mind, and connecting with a higher power.
Exactly. The second theme is faith and trust in divine will. And it compares 2 Corinthians 5.7 with the Buddhist concept of faith and dharma, the Hindu teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, and the concept of trusting Allah in the Quran.
So even though the language and the specific deities might be different, there's this shared understanding of surrendering to a higher power, something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And the third theme is contentment over desire and materialism.
Which is so countercultural in our materialistic society.
Right. But it's a message that's found across different spiritual traditions. The chapter draws connections between Matthew 6 and the Buddhist Four Noble Truths, which talk about suffering caused by desire, the teachings on detachment in the Bhagavad Gita, and verses in the Quran that encourage generosity and discourage hoarding.
It's amazing to see how these different religions from different parts of the world all point towards the same truth, that true fulfillment comes not from material possessions, but from spiritual growth and contentment.
And finally, the fourth theme is achieving through humility and non-action.
Which takes us back to that achieve without doing idea.
Right. The chapter compares Matthew 23.12, which talks about the humble being exalted, with the concept of Wu Wei in Taoism and some schools of Buddhism, the teachings on selfless action in the Bhagavad Gita, and the Islamic concept of tawakkul, which means reliance on God.
Again, we see this common thread across diverse traditions, this emphasis on humility, surrender, and trust in a higher power as the path to true achievement.
It's a beautiful reminder that even though there are differences in our beliefs and practices, there are also some fundamental truths that unite us.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, the key takeaway for you is the incredible power and importance of looking inward for wisdom, for guidance, for contentment, and for true achievement.
It's not about retreating from the world, but about grounding ourselves in our faith and using that inner strength to navigate the world with greater clarity and purpose.
As you go about your day, we want to leave you with a really important question to ponder.
How might shifting your focus from seeking external validation to cultivating that inner wisdom actually change not just how you see the world, but also how you act within it?
What is one small step you could take today to start cultivating that deeper connection with yourself and with God?
This deep dive into inner wisdom is really just the beginning of a lifelong journey.
The principles we've explored offer a rich and enduring foundation for living a more intentional and meaningful life. We encourage you to keep reflecting on these ideas and see how they resonate in your own unique journey.
And remember, the wisdom you seek is already within you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
See you next time.
Bye for now.